Hey there, curious minds. What if I told you that something as peaceful as a whale could turn into one of nature's most explosive time bombs? No, this is a scene from a Hollywood action movie. It's real life. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the shocking world of whale explosions. That's right, exploding whales. They're messy, unexpected, and the science behind, and will blow your mind. Stick around, because by the end of this you'll know why these gigantic creatures sometimes go boom and why it does happen to every large animal. Trust me, you don't want to miss the final reveal. So, how does a whale explode? Let's break it down. Imagine a whale minus 40, 50, or even 60 feet long washing up on shore. It's massive, it's lifeless, but it's far from harmless. After death, a whale's body goes through the natural process of decomposition, just like any other living organism. But here's the twist: whales are huge, and their decomposition process is intense. Inside that gigantic body, bacteria begin breaking down the flesh. This bacteria produces gases methane, hydrogen sulfide, and ammonia, which accumulate inside the whale's body. The thick layers of blubber act like a balloon, trapping those gases inside. And just like any balloon, when too much pressure builds up, it bursts. But instead of confetti, you get a nasty explosion of whale guts, blubber, and body parts. The sheer size of a whale means that when it explodes, it's no small damage and a smell that lingers for days. That's right, what starts as a slow decomposition process can turn into a spectacular blowout of whale-sized proportions. One of the most famous incidents of whale detonation happened back in 1970 in Florence, Oregon. This story has gone down in history because of how disastrous and frankly hilarious it was. Here's what happened: a massive 45-foot sperm whale washed up on the shore, and it was rotting fast. The local authorities had a big stinky problem on their hands. How do you get rid of an 8-ton whale? They figured the best solution was dynamite. After all, what's a little explosion between friends? The plan was simple: blow up the whale, and the scavengers would take care of the rest. But things didn't exactly go as planned. They used way too much dynamite, and when they set it off, the explosion sent whale blubber flying up to 800 feet, landing on cars, nearby buildings, and even smashing a brand new vehicle. And the birds that were supposed to swoop in and clean up the mess, they were long gone, scared away by the deafening blast. The result: public relations, remembered for days. So that event has since become legendary. It was such a spectacle that humorist Joel Berry even wrote about it, and the footage of the explosion went viral decades later. But Florence, Oregon is just one example of how explosive a decomposing whale can be. Let's fast forward to Taiwan in 2004. Another sperm whale, this one weighing around 60 tons, had died and was being transported through the city of Tainan for research. Scientists were trying to study the body, but they didn't account for the gases building up inside the whale. What happened next was nothing short of insane. While the whale was being moved on a truck, it exploded right in the middle of a crowded street. Blood, guts, and whale organs rained down on everything: shopfronts, cars, and unlucky bystanders. Imagine being in the middle of that chaos. The explosion was caused by the same process gases from decomposition built up to a point where the whale couldn't contain it anymore. The pressure became so intense that it burst, coating the city in whale remains. And while it may look like a scene from a disaster movie, it's just another example of what happens when nature decides to take things into its own hands. Now, you might be thinking, why don't we just prevent this from happening? Why don't we stop these explosions before they happen while dealing with dead to sea? Sure, it's possible, but not always practical. Burial is another option, but again, when a whale weighs tens of tons, you need a pretty big hole to keep it from becoming a problem later on. In some cases, controlled explosions are still used today, but they're much more cautious about how much dynamite they pack. Governments and environmental agencies have learned from the mistakes of the past, and now they approach whale disposal with more care. And for good reason, nobody wants to relive them. But here's a question: why don't we hear about other large animals exploding? For example, why does a dead gorilla pose the same kind of risk as a dead whale? Hey, well, it all comes down to size. Sure, every animal undergoes decomposition, and every animal builds up gas inside its body after death, but the scale is completely different. A whale weighs anywhere from 300 to 1,000 times more than a gorilla. That means there's far more flesh to decompose, far more gas to produce, and ultimately, far more pressure building up inside. The bigger the animal, the bigger the risk of an explosion. To put it simply, a whale has a much higher chance of exploding than a gorilla because of the sheer volume of gas that builds up inside. A gorilla might bloat during decomposition, but it's not going to blow apart with the same explosive force as a 60-ton whale. It's a reminder that size does matter, especially when you're dealing with the aftermath of death. So what's being done to handle these potentially explosive situations today? Well, after the messy incidents of the past, more environmentally friendly methods have been developed. Towing the carcass back to the ocean to let nature handle it is often the preferred option, though it doesn't always work in every situation. If a whale washes up in its own risks, if the sand is deep enough, gas can still build up and cause a smaller underground explosion. Remains don't just disappear, they scatter over a wide area. Whale blubber, blood, and guts can affect local ecosystems, pollute water sources, and attract. The idea of a whale explosion might seem funny or bizarre. The reality is that it can have lasting consequences on the surrounding area. So what have we learned today? Whale explosions are a wild, chaotic, and very real part of nature. Whether it's a controlled explosion gone wrong or a natural buildup of gas, these massive creatures can pack a punch even after death. From Oregon's infamous blubber blast to spontaneous eruption in Taiwan, these events have shocked and fascinated us for decades, and it all comes down to the power of decomposition and the raw force of nature. But before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever heard of a weirder natural phenomenon than a whale explosion? What other strange things has nature surprised you with? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And hey, if you enjoyed today's deep dive into the explosive world of whales, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more mind-blowing content, and share this with your friends. Who knows, maybe next time we'll be talking about the science of gorillas or other strange natural events. Until then, stay curious and stay safe. Whales generally roam in deep waters due to their cold temperatures and high hydrostatic pressures, but sometimes changes in tides, melting icebergs, and dynamic food sources make whales relocate and wander off trajectory. When a whale dies and sinks, typically known as a whale fall, a complex localized ecosystem builds up around it. First, the sharks cut the whale into pieces to feed, and then the skeletal system serves as a food source for Osedax, a bone-eating genus of worms that secrete acids on the bones, dissolving fats and proteins. Believe it or not, this deep-sea decomposition process can last for more than 3 decades, providing food to hundreds of species: crabs, shrimp, bacteria, fish, worms that thrive around the carcass. However, when whales die closer to shore and wash up, the gases produced during decomposition, along with their enormous lungs filled with air, make them buoyant, keeping them afloat even after death. This floating is what brings them ashore, and when they get there, that gas buildup is what turns them into ticking time bombs.